Vanilla World of Warcraft, the starting place of arguably the best and most successful MMO to date. Vanilla WoW was so captivating that 15 years after it released back in 2004, it was then re-released in 2019 as Classic World of Warcraft. Vanilla just hit different for so many people for various different reasons. From the leveling experience to the first ever dungeon to the endgame raiding and everything in between. But for many people, a large part of why Vanilla WoW was so good was because of the world itself and the zones contained within. Actually, it was so large that it was split between 2 continents with a total of 40 different zones. And there is no doubt if you played all those years ago at some point before the major world changes in Cataclysm that you'd have fond memories and a touch of nostalgia linked to many of those zones. And for good reason. Because the zones in Vanilla WoW were exceptional, for the most part at least, because there were some zones that were either lacking in content or just straight up sucked for different reasons. So strap in, grab yourself a snack as we're about to rank every zone in Vanilla WoW from worst to best. But quickly before we get into the list, we need to know what the criteria is for the list, and it's pretty simple. It's just, is the zone any good? Does it have good quests? Is the leveling route here any good? Is the zone layout any good? Is it aesthetically a nice place to be? And above all, it will be heavily based on my opinion. My opinion may differ to yours, so I'd love to hear what zones you love or hate and why below. Kicking it off in last place with no surprises to a lot of people, we have Decelous. I think it goes without saying that having a whole zone that is basically one huge graveyard inhabited by centaurs isn't particularly interesting. I mean, it's always been a zone that I would skip during leveling myself, and I would imagine a ton of other people have never even done a single quest in this zone. Because to be led into Decelous during your questing route typically means you would have already been questing in Stonetalon Mountains, which also wasn't a very popular zone to begin with. The only other zone to access Decelous from is Feralas, and if you were to be questing in Feralas, you'd already be above the questing level for the majority of Decelous. But hey, if you like the colour grey and being asked where wrecks are every 5 minutes in general chat, maybe it's the zone for you. At number 39 we have Searing Gorge, and I know you're probably thinking there are way worse zones than Searing Gorge, and I thought that too. But then the more I was trying to sort out the list, the more I realised that I didn't ever really like Searing Gorge all that much. And just to be clear, I am fully excluding the fact that Blackrock Mountain is connected to Searing Gorge, by the way, as I feel that genuinely could have been its own mini zone that would have 100% have ranked higher than Searing Gorge. I would typically maybe do some quests in Searing Gorge, but not much honestly, as I didn't find it all that interesting. And the main reason why I put this zone so low is that in questing zones, I don't particularly like the idea of having multi-layer levels in an underground complex such as the Cauldron. I mean, sure, on paper it's kinda cool, but we've all been there, we've just landed at Thorium Point, we're running towards Blackrock Mountain, we've turned auto run on to quickly alt tab or take your eyes off the screen for a second, and bam! You fell into the cave system itself, and it is annoying. Yeah! With that being said, the one small redeeming factor about Searing Gorge is that Thorium Point is a good flight location. Up next we have Darkshore. Maybe this one is heavily on me and my opinion, but I've never been a huge fan of the Night Elf aesthetic. I know, shoot me now. While questing in Darkshore, which I have done a few times at this point, I never really got the feeling of, I like this place, but more of, what's the lowest level I can get out of this place at the lowest level possible? That being said, I do like the Tower of Alphalax, probably more so in recency bias because that's where part of the Divine Storm rune was during Season of Discovery for Paladins, and to be fair, the speed of leveling in Darkshore is actually pretty fast compared to some other zones. Who would have guessed it, but at number 37 is Moonglade. The reason why this zone is lower on the list isn't because of the Night Elf aesthetic, so to say, but more the fact that if you're not a druid, then it's largely a useless zone outside of people who like to roleplay. It does have some redeeming qualities though, such as when the lunar event is around. This is where you go to take on the open world mini boss Omen, and I can vividly remember in Classic being a mage with a warlock friend, we spent hours kiting this boss around a shrine, juggling aggro and trying to two-man the boss for fun. This city is also quite nice, and it does have a lovely lake in the centre of it, so there is that. But let's move on to number 36, which is where we have the Blasted Lands. There's a fair few reasons why a ton of people do not like this zone. For starters, the Horde do not get a direct flight path here and have to fly to Stonard in Swamp of Sorrows. Luckily it's still pretty close though. It's a zone where there's probably a little bit too much orange and it lacks different colours, so aesthetically it gets boring really quick. The quests honestly are kind of tedious, with lots of quests that have terrible drop rates, and half of the zone is just a useless wasteland full of elite mobs that serve next to no purpose other than being around the world boss, Lord Kazakh, which in vanilla and classic 99% of the player base would never have seen, let alone defeat the world boss. So why is this zone not lower on the list? Well, there's two main reasons I've not put it any lower, the first being that it was the go-to place to learn weapon skill, as mobs around the Dark Portal would survive forever on 1 HP and still grant you weapon skills. So if you was level 60, depending on your class, you could effectively just AFK here while attacking one of the mobs while gaining weapon skill, and the other reason is because of the Dark Portal itself. Although in vanilla the Dark Portal serves no purpose, I can still remember the first time I ever saw it and I had no clue what it was other than holy fuck, this is on the loading screen, it's so cool. Moving on to number 35, we have the Stonetalon Mountains. I believe a lot of people like myself just skip over this zone while leveling, even though there's a quest in the Barrens that really wants you to move into the Stonetalon Mountains, and for unsuspecting players they often find out they get sent here too early and are out-leveled by the zone, as I believe the quest is available at a pretty low level during the Barrens. If you do come to Stonetalon Mountain at a reasonable level however, you soon find out that the layout and the flow of the zone kinda sucks. There's a lot of running backwards and forwards, a lot of mountains, obviously, and if you're Alliance then it's even worse because it is definitely a zone that is favoured towards the Horde faction. On the bright side, both factions do at least get a flight path here, and the Charred Vale is an open field full of mobs to kill for some quests here. If you're also an enchanter on the Horde side, you'll have to come here at some point, as this is where you learn above 150 enchanted from the trainer in Sunrock Retreat, which as far as names of towns go, Sunrock Retreat is a pretty cool name. Felwood. Deeply ingrained from classic 2019 of hearing, seeing and sometimes being the victim of rogues and dispellers trying to stop you stacking your world buffs for raid. Although I didn't use that to put too much weight behind it, as you could have been playing on a PvE server or just didn't bother with world buffs entirely. The real reason why Felwood typically sucks is that it suffers from the same issues as Darkshore. It's long, it's thin, nope, it's not what you're thinking, and the death runs can be atrocious. The flight path for the Horde is pretty damn good, located just west of Bloodvenom Falls, pretty much in the centre of the map. The Alliance on the other hand, yeah, it really sucks if you need to do anything at the bottom of Felwood. It's not all bad in Felwood though, to be honest. It does have some pretty good quests, such as the quest in the underground complex of Jadenar, and I guess aesthetically the zone does a really good job of capturing the theme of a corrupted elvish kind of zone. But let's move on to number 33, which is where we have Azshara. And I bet you're probably surprised because Azshara is usually considered one of the worst zones in vanilla WoW. And don't get me wrong, it's not a great zone. The layout of the zone is horrendous, the amount of content and quests here suck, and if it's your job to douse inside of Molten Core, you have to come here every week, swim to Duke Hydraxis and pick up your Aqua Quintessence. At least until you're able to get the Eternal Quintessence, that is. But it does have a few good points. Firstly, unlike some zones, it does have a flight point for both the Horde and the Alliance. The farming route for large thorium veins isn't too bad. If you enjoy fishing, then you could have some chill sessions out in Azshara, and let's not forget, it has one of the greatest mysteries in World of Warcraft. The huge Timbermoor Hold Gate, which I believe even to this day hasn't been used for any content, but please do correct me if I'm wrong, as I'm not a retail player. Aside from all of that, Azshara as a zone is beautiful. Just look at some of these community shots from Wowhead. It really is a shame that the zone was never fully complete, else it could have been so much better. Right, now we're beginning to get to the point where there isn't really any bad zones left, so to say. So this is where the list started to get pretty hard. At number 32, we have the Western Plaguelands. The zone is teeming with lore related content, which is great if you follow the lore. And even if you don't follow any lore, it still adds really good depth to the zone. The layout of the zone is pretty good. It holds Scholomance or Skulamance, whatever you want to call it, Amance, which is a pretty good dungeon, and there is some really good quests here, such as the quest chain called In Dreams, where at the end of the chain you get to see Taylan Fordring fight it out against a powerful Grand Inquisitor. So what gives? Why isn't the Western Plaguelands higher? Well, only the Alliance get a flight path here directly. The Horde however have to fly to Undercity and run here. If you're heading towards Scholomance, it can sometimes be tedious to constantly run through the ruins of Anderhall, and most subjectively, I personally just haven't ever really been a huge fan of the Plaguelands style and aesthetic. At number 31, we have Teldrassil, and I can already hear the angry typings in the comment section about this one. Again, similar to Darkshore, it's probably more on me because I'm not a huge fan of the Night Elves, but with that being said, Teldrassil does have a pretty chill vibe and the music and general ambience is good. This is the only starting zone that is low down, as all starting zones are made exceptionally well, but one of the major reasons why I put Teldrassil down here is because I typically like to pick up mining while leveling, and yeah, you can't learn mining, blacksmithing or engineering in Teldrassil or Darkshore, which is one of only 3 major cities available to the Alliance in vanilla by the way. So not only is it typically a zone I'm not overly keen on aesthetically, it also has which many regard as the worst capital city of Horde and Alliance combined, coupled with the fact that you are then shipped off to Darkshore to follow up your leveling, which again as a zone I wasn't a fan of. I will say though, in true starter zone fashion, that the leveling route in Teldrassil has a good flow to it at least. Now sitting pretty at number 30 is Deadwind Pass. Similarly to Ajara, many of you might be wondering why the hell isn't this last place. There's fuck all to do in Deadwind Pass, and yep, there's nothing really to do here, and if you're just passing by, you're in and out in the matter of minutes. However, the zone is pretty cool because it hosts the Castle of Karazhan, which as we all know in the following expansion goes on to be one of the best raids of the Burning Crusade. Aside from the castle itself, more interestingly, if you discovered it during Vanilla or Classic 2019, is the Karazhan Crypts, which is a large underground complex that was rumoured to have been a mega dungeon that was never completed. And you could quite easily access it by dying and running past the gate and resurrecting on the other side of the gate to explore the crypts. Also, if you jump down this little crack next to the castle, you'll see a lovely little smiley face under the castle. Duskwallow Marsh, home to the broodmother of the Black Dragonfly. Now, this zone isn't awful, but it definitely is not particularly appealing to me, nor is it very exciting. The main reason why people come to Duskwallow Marsh is for Onyxia, and well, both flight paths aren't exactly close to Onyxia. The Horde have to run nearly the entirety of the zone to get here, and the Alliance have to swim towards the mountainous coast to get there as well. The majority of the map, at least to me, feels like a worse version of either Swamp of Sorrows or the Wetlands. But there is good points to Duskwallow Marsh. Let's start with the obvious one. It has Onyxia's Lair, one of the very first original raids in World of Warcraft. It also has Alkaz Island, which you typically get sent here during the Scepter of Shifting Sands questline to take down an open world mini-boss. It's also where Nat Pagal hangs out, and lastly the themes of both the Alliance town of Theramore and the Horde town of Brackenwell Village really suits the faction you're playing. Coming in at number 28 we have Thousand Needles. This one was pretty tough, because if it was just the mountainous side of Thousand Needles, then I'd probably have put it much lower on the list, and if it was just the Shimmering Flats, then I'd probably put it a little higher. But it's all one zone, so it made it a little awkward to rank. The main area around Thousand Needles just kinda sucks. I'm not particularly a massive fan of questing here, the layout of the map isn't great, and although Freewind Post is kinda cool, I'm not that much of a fan of using lifts to get to towns and cities. That being said, however, the Shimmering Flats side of the zone is pretty good. And yes, it's kind of bland and it's just one big open salt field pretty much, but at the same time, when you gather the quest, you have this big open area where seemingly no matter what you kill, you're working towards completing the quest. And I mean, come on, it has a racetrack in the middle, that's cool as fuck. Ashenvale. This zone does have a ton going for it. Despite me never really being in love with the Night Elf aesthetic, Ashenvale does do a good job. The quests here are pretty good for the most part. There's tons to do, whether it's questing, herbing, mining, killing one of the Emerald Dragon World bosses that people never really got a chance to do much, and even the Black Fathom Depths dungeon, which is a decent dungeon, as in vanilla there wasn't really that many bad dungeons. The zone does have some drawbacks though. For starters, it is massive. If you're on one side of the zone and have a quest on the far side, or need to get to the other side for any reason, and you are either A, not Horde, or B, you are Horde and haven't picked up the flight path at Zoram Strand, then oh boy, you got some running to do. If you are Horde and need to run to the opposite side, and picture this from a new player's perspective, or the very first time you was in Ashenvale, following the path along takes you directly to Astronor, an Alliance town just past halfway on the other side of the map. And although when you view the map it looks easy to run around, you soon realise there's actually a lot of annoying mountains in Ashenvale. These annoying ass mountains are all over the place, and a lot of them are a real struggle to get over. I mean, honestly, if it wasn't for the mountainous areas of Ashenvale, I would have put it a little bit higher, but I mean, when I'm there, the mountains just piss me off, so that's why it's a bit lower. But at number 26, we have the Burning Steppes or Steppies. What I do really like about this place is that you instantly get the feeling of, oh shit, this is a high level zone, because it is filled with elite dragons and it really gives off a vibe of a dangerous place. The questing here is relatively decent. You often can pick up quests that go onto longer chains for dungeons like Lower Blackrock Spire or the Blackrock Depths. There is a quest here to slay an elite dragon at the small northeastern cave that can give a pretty decent pair of previous equivalent shoulders, giving 2% hit chance for melee users. There is also the Altar of Storms. I honestly don't really know what it's for or if there's anything to do here other than checking for a Black Lotus spawn, but it's cool as fuck. And you get the other side of the Blackrock Mountain with this huge bridge that you know is going to take you somewhere really cool, and that's where one of the bad points comes in. Going into Blackrock Mountain from this side absolutely sucks because for whatever reason Blizzard decided, hey, no mounts allowed on this long ass bridge into Blackrock Mountain. Although the quests you do get here are pretty good, I feel like you don't actually get that many to complete within the zone itself, and a lot of the zone, especially the western side, there isn't much to do there. Oh, and let's not forget the annoying little imps that always tag onto you when you're trying to do mining in this place. Yeah, fuck those little guys. Now, just breaking into the top 25 is the Hinterlands. Pretty cool place, honestly. Would have loved to have put it higher because it's great for the Horde. The elite group quest the Horde get around the troll camp is definitely top tier. Really feels like a true outdoor open world dungeon, and the quest rewards are so good there's a solid previous trinket for melees. Aesthetically, the zone is gorgeous. I really like the coastline village for the Horde, and I also really like the town for Alliance here too, but this is kind of where we get to the reason why the Hinterlands isn't any higher up. For a zone that should be compatible for both factions, it just feels as though there isn't really a ton here for Alliance to do, and I understand there's plenty of other zones where either faction has nothing to do, but in contested zones such as the Hinterlands, especially being quite a high level, I feel like there should be enough content for both factions. Still though, it is a beautiful zone. Now here's a zone that's just like Marmite, it's Silithus. Some people hate this zone and I completely understand why. It's pretty much full of ugly ass annoying bug caves all over, but objectively the zone is pretty solid. It does have a lot of repeatable content to do here, especially in later patches or phases of vanilla. It's a pretty damn good place for stealth classes to go farming and hunting for ooze covered thorium veins. Considering at this point you'll have a minimum of a 60% mount and potentially 100% mount, the zone doesn't feel that large, so it's pretty easy to get around. This is also a place where you take down Thunderant to get Thunder Fury, and of course we have both 20-man and 40-man versions of Anchorage. Yet again another raid just like the zone where it's either you hate it or you love it. So what's bad? Well, it's not a particularly nice zone to go sightseeing in. If you're on a PvP server, be ready to be absolutely bum rushed by people outside of Cenarian Hold at every way and angle possible. The repeatable content I just spoke about, yeah, it wasn't very fun and it kind of sucked to do. The whole badge farm through the field duty quest is honestly a horrible design, but I do want to end this zone on a high note though, that I still think Silithus as a zone gets unjust hate and it isn't as bad as people make out. So at number 23 we have the other side of the Plaguelands, the Eastern Plaguelands. So this is largely similar to the Western Plaguelands, but generally is just better in nearly every single way. It has a flight point for both factions at the Light's Hope Chapel. There is a ton of great quests and quest chains in EPL, such as the Battle of Darkshore, which gives a quest reward of tea with sugar. And as a typical British man, if it involves a good cup of tea, then I like it. If you like lore, this place seems to be absolutely full of it, and it also contains Stratholme, which is just an iconic dungeon for many reasons. I do wish they used Tyr's Hand more for content, or at least made it more relevant in some way, as I generally never go to Tyr's Hand because I've never really felt the need to. I don't even know if there's much to do there. It is a pretty cool place though. Winterspring. There's something about Winterspring that is just cozy and relaxing. It's one of the very few snowy zones in vanilla, and just like all the other snowy zones, it captures that feeling greatly. Everlook is a nice little gnomish village in the centre of the map with access for both factions by flight points here. The north side of Winterspring really feels like you're in the Arctic, with just heavy snow all around, full of saber-tooths and polar bears. This is also where you can grab the reins of the Winterspring Frost Saber if you're Alliance. Down at the south is a big elite demon complex called Dark Whisper Gorge that really doesn't serve much purpose, but if you ever wanted to get into the off-limits Highjowl zone in vanilla, this is the place where you can do some jumping to get there. The reason I didn't put it much higher is because I never really feel like I get the opportunity to quest here much. I mostly find myself in Winterspring at either level 59 or already at level 60, as it's a zone you can easily skip. And we are getting into the part of the list where it becomes really hard to choose the order for the zones, but it is a really lovely zone. Coming in at number 21 is Duskwood. This might surprise quite a lot of people because I know this zone is absolutely loved. I mean, for good reason. The zone is great. The quest in here is incredible, and as Alliance, particularly human, this is the first zone you'll come across that is spooky and haunted, and it's just a good shift in terms of what you've already been through so far. The safety of Elwynn and Westfall, and now you're coming into a dark, dingy place full of zombies and horrors all around. Also, let's not forget Stitches.
Okay, let's go in the inn. I mean, he's not gonna be in the inn. He's over there. He's on the other side of the inn!
Where?
He's coming! Run!
Yes!
This motherfucker is so ingrained into people's minds that sometimes even I, at level 6 there, still try to dodge around him because at such a low level he instilled the kind of fear that only undead players in Silverpine know with the Sons of Arathi. But if you like the spooky aesthetic, ghouls, worgons, ghosts, any of the kind, Duskwood is right up your street. Sadly for me, it just doesn't quite tickle those spots to get any higher. I do however see Duskwood as a great bar to set in what makes a good zone because it does so many things right. Reaching the halfway point of the list is the Wetlands. Menethil Harbour is such a nice place. It's always my go-to for getting to the other continent from Stormwind. Menethil to Theramore, baby, we all know it's the best route going. I feel like the Wetlands keeps up the momentum of the feeling you got while leveling inside Loch Modan. You've just come from this beautiful zone and come downwards, and you really get this sense of coming into a marshland absolutely full to the brim with a mage's wet dream in terms of mobs they can stack in AoE, and a warrior's worst nightmare for trying to take on 1 or 2 mobs at a time. There is plenty of good quests here, such as the Orc encampment where you start gathering banners and sabotaging the Orcs' catapults before trying to take on a pretty tough elite called Chieftain Necrush. In the Wetlands, you never really feel too far because only half the map is really usable, as the other half the map where Grim Batol is located is full of high level elite dragonkin for the Horde and their Onyxia Attunement quest. So all in all, I think the Wetlands is just a solid leveling zone for the Alliance. So let's move on to number 19, and this is the zone just before the Wetlands, which is Loch Modan. This zone is beautiful with its huge loch in the middle, followed by the dam that everyone can recognise with the water pouring out of the dwarfs' heads. The quests here are pretty solid too. The zone is kind of split into sections, the west side with the lower end quests, the excavation site with the hunting house behind it, and the elite ogre stronghold. All of the quests here flow nicely, with the exception of some of the hunting quests. Specifically where you need to kill, I think it's 5 boars, because even if just one other person is doing this quest at the same time as you, it's so hard to kill 5 boars in the time required before it fails, just because there's such a short amount of spawns of the certain boar that you need in the given time. Yeah, that one is definitely a pain in the arse, but the rest of the zone, at least aesthetically, is definitely chef's kiss. Swamp of Sorrows. This bad boy has within it one of the best dungeons ever created, the Temple of Atal Hakar, or better known as the Sunken Temple. It had to get a mention in why the Swamp of Sorrows plays so highly because I can remember the first time I saw this in the distance and swam to it, only to find out it was huge underground. And I kept getting lost, and it really gave me a sense of, okay, this feels quite important. Later to find out it's actually a dungeon that I was way too low level for, but once I was at the right level and came back, this place was mind blowing. And you know, outside of that, the quests here are decent. You could just be going about your day and holy shit, big ass screen dragging out of nowhere spawns that you have to now keep a lookout unless you want a grey screen. Stonard is also a pretty good little town for the Horde. Sadly, the Alliance don't have a flight path here, so that kind of sucks on that part, and I would have loved a little bit more to do for both factions, but the fact that it has Sunken Temple is enough to boost it up this high. Moving on to number 17, we have the Redridge Mountains. Oh, I love Lakeshire, it's so relaxing and cozy. Aesthetically, Lakeshire, Lake Everstill, Stonewatch Keep, just Redridge as a whole is just a stunning zone. There is a great mix of normal quests here along with some really good elite quests and group elite quests to take on. I do wish the Horde had some stuff here to experience because having a zone this awesome just be for Alliance feels illegal. I mean shit, it's not just beautiful, this place was deadly too and could quickly humble you if you wasn't careful around the group elite quests. Redridge done an excellent job of carrying on the feeling that Elwynn and Westfall gave. The only part that kinda sucked was you had to either come back after doing the zone from Westfall or loop around after doing Duskwood, and if you had just completed Duskwood you might be slightly too high level for a lot of the quests, although you could still definitely come and do the group quests. So the route to get to the zone didn't flow as well, but that shouldn't take away from how good the zone itself actually is. At number 16 we have the Badlands, and if there's one thing that became extremely apparent while doing this list is just how much better the Horde generally have it in the majority of the contested zones in vanilla. Badlands is no exception because while it's not awful for the Alliance in terms of questing or access to Alderman for example, what is awful is the fact that yet again there's another zone where the Alliance doesn't get a flight point. So if you was an Alliance player and you wanted to come to the Badlands you would have to fly to Loch Modan and run down. But what does make Badlands great, for the Horde at least, is Kargath. It's probably the best and most strategically located place to put your Hearthstone. Tons of Horde players will know the meet at X time in Kargath, ready to ride out with world buffs together into the Blackrock Mountain for either Molten Core or Blackwing Lair. From Kargath you're in the centre of the Eastern Kingdoms, so you're never too far from Undercity or Gromgol, where there are Zeppelins to Orgrimmar and Booty Bay for the boat to Ratchet. But let's move on, because sitting at number 15 we have the Alterac Mountains. At first I really struggled to know where I was going to place this, as I feel like this is a zone that could be either number 10 or number 30. And then the more I thought about it, I realised this zone is actually really cool. For starters, it is one of the few zones in vanilla that actually has more than one area of different types of land. In the centre at the ruins of Alterac and Crushridge Hold is full of mountainous snow, and surrounding that area on all sides is your normal chill farm and meadow kind of land. The elite ogre quests inside ruins of Alterac have always felt much more important than they probably are, and while inside the hold itself, if you're not careful, those motherfuckers in there can humble you and your party real quick. Alongside this, can you remember the very first time you saw an ominous glow in the zone from far away, and the closer you approached towards it, it started to turn into a big glowing sphere coming out of the ground? Having absolutely no idea what it is or its purpose, all you knew was the name on the map, Dalaran. But it gave you that typical vanilla WoW discovery kind of vibe. This zone is also where warriors finish probably one of the most iconic class quests in vanilla to obtain their Whirlwind Axe. The rogues also have a secret hideout in the mountains called Ravenhold Manor. This zone seems so small and boring, but really it's actually packed with tons of cool stuff and areas. Now at the number 14 spot we have the Arathi Highlands, and this place just ticks so many boxes for what makes a good zone. Both factions get a reasonable flight point. Both factions get a bunch of good quests to do here. The layout of the zone is great. You get to help out pirates at Faldir's Cove. Amazing zone to farm materials for that level such as Iron Veins. The Witherbach Troll Village. The elite quest in the Compounder Stromgarde Keep. Elemental fire farming even for level 60s at the Circle of West Binding. This zone just has so much going for it. It's also just a beautiful place to be while leveling. Just take a look at it. For a zone that is mostly a grass and farmland type style, it still manages to have a ton of character within it, with the stone archways, huge stone artifacts around the zone, and the big ass stone wall separating the Arathi Highlands from the Hillsbrad foothills. I feel like being at number 14 on the list just doesn't do this place justice, but it's so hard when we have other zones like Dunmorrow, which is our 13th zone on the list. Now to be honest, pretty much all the starting zones were made exceptionally well, so it was really hard to kind of pick which of them is slightly ahead of the others, and it's honestly all down to preference. Dunmorrow though is exceptionally cozy. There is a very home-like feeling while you're in Dunmorrow with the fire pits, bunkers everywhere covered in snow, logs burning inside buildings, and this just general kind of friendliness and warmth that the dwarfs give off make it feel slightly special. That is until you discover Gnomeregan and think, oh wow, what's this? It looks cool, so you venture inside to be killed by some school level little gnome bastards. Never been much of a fan of Gnomeregan by the way. Dunmorrow also holds some cool little locations such as the Frozen Runway or Airport up in the mountains that you can get to by constantly trying to jump up the mountains until you find a way up. Or when you reach the peak of Dunmorrow, you find a flag and the remains with some belongings of I guess an adventurer who had discovered the peak and didn't live to tell the tale. Morogh is just a lovely place to be, and honestly at this point you can kind of put any zone in whatever order you want because all of the remaining zones are all just so good. From one starter zone to another, we have Tirisfal Glades at number 12. There isn't many zones more nostalgic than Tirisfal Glades for undead players. The entire zone and atmosphere within the zone is just spot on for what it tries to achieve. A sky that is always eerily dark, a land that is forsaken, ruined by the Lich King as any kind of life desperately tries to survive. There isn't many zones that can fully immerse you the same as Tirisfal Glades can. Now, as usual with all of the starting zones, the flow of the quest in here is great. From the second you spawn at Deathnell to when you visit Undercity for the first time, the transition throughout the zone is smooth. Let's not forget possibly the best dungeons in the entire game are in Tirisfal Glades as well, which is the Scarlet Monastery, and it's huge with 4 separate different wings, each making up a full-size dungeon each. Just even exploring the zone, the Deathly Fields, the Scarlet Crusade everywhere, Death and Decay, even Murlocs are somehow here. From the actual gameplay in Tirisfal to the lore, it is a top tier zone. Just don't try to walk into the Western Plaguelands at level 10 because you're going to realise real quick you're way too low level for that. Now coming in at number 11 we have Feralas. Off rip, I'ma say this one hits home because I remember way back when on my Tauren Hunter, this is when I found my very first epic item while leveling. It was a dazzling longsword. It dropped off a random bear not far from Camp Majache, and with it being in vanilla, my dumb ass only being like 10 years old, I equipped that sucker instantly and used it for as long as I could even remember. It's moments like that that you realise and remember certain zones and memories within this game. It could have happened anywhere, but it didn't. It happened here, in Feralas. Now, rose-tinted goggles off, is the zone good? Actually, yeah, it's pretty fucking good. The Alliance kind of get 2 flight points here because one borders 1k Needles and the other one is on the island at Feathermoon Hold. Questing here was always pretty solid. I would say I preferred questing here as Horde, but both were honestly pretty enjoyable. Dire Maul needs a huge mention because just like Scarlet Monastery, Dire Maul sits within Feralas as a huge multi-dungeon semi-zone for max level, hosting all kinds of good shit from Prebis gear to world buffs to gold farming to just experiencing all of the badass dungeons. It's also another gorgeous zone. By looking at it, you would never think that Desolus, our last placed ugly ass zone, would be just above it. Also, we get the Isle of Dread. You get sent here during the Scepter of Shifting Sands questline too. That questline really sends you to some cool places around the world. Okay, here we go, down to the top 10. And in 10th place we got Durotar. That's right, Durotar. Yes, it might be orange. Yes, it might be a bit ugly to some people. But this realistically is a damn good zone. Arguably the cleanest leveling route into a starting zone's major city out of all of the starting zones. You start in the Valley of Trials, proving yourself to be worthy by waking up peons and gathering apples. You then move towards Senjin Village with the Echo Isles, a twang of jungle to go with the orange. By the way, Senjin Village is cool as fuck, all the trolls are just chilling and dancing. On the way up to Razor Hill you come across Tiragard Keep on the right hand side, which you've had a few pretty good quests there too. Now going from Razor Hill you naturally work your way up north until you come to the Gates of Orgrimmar. You run inside, the music starts playing. And the rest is history. This leveling route is so clean and the immersion when you hit Orgrimmar for the first time is amazing. So on the surface, Durotar might seem a bit ugly, it might be a bit orange and a bit barbaric for the Alliance players, but it is a damn good zone. So let's move on to a zone a little more picturesque. At number 9 I've put Mulgore. Again, starter zone, leveling route, all the boxes are ticked for this place. But what Mulgore has is probably the most relaxing, chill and harmonious vibes that you'll find in this game, with the calming music and the chill Taurens saying stuff like,
"May the eternal sun shine upon thee.
The winds guide you. Homogenized? No way, I like the ladies. Here's the beef."
The zone truly is stunning. Even in a random mine or a cave like this, you find some of the best views this game has to offer. Overlooking Bloodhoof Village with the surrounding lake. I mean, what's not to love? In my opinion, it's definitely one of my favourite zones and worthy of being a top 10 on anyone's list. But it's time to get away from the starter zones for now, and onto our next zone on the list, Silverpine Forest. This zone is very good. Let's just start off by saying it carries on the theme you get from Tirisfal, but now it's even more creepy and a whole lot more dangerous. That's right, we all know about those Sons of Aragorn, when you're just going about your business questing and all of a sudden a son of a Usain Bolt comes running over the hill and makes you Worgen food. But it's not just the Sons of Aragorn that make this place dangerous, oh no. Try going into the Castle of Fenris Isle and doing those quests solo. That place is literally like a minefield. One special thing that Silverpine Forest has, that I believe only 2 places in the entire game during vanilla have, is that mobs completely change depending on the time of day. So during the day in Pywood Village is just like an ordinary day. The town is hostile to Horde players and friendly to Alliance players. You can even go here to vendor, repair and treat it like any other village as the Alliance. But when the night comes, all of the residents turn into Worgens and become hostile to everyone. It's the little details like this that make Silverpine so good and worthy of being 8th on the list. From dark and spooky to bright and dry, we have Tanaris at number 7. I'll start with saying, yes I know it's basically one huge open desert, and that it takes a century to run down and do the quest where you have to kill the shrub guys at the bottom. But my god, does Tanaris have some good stuff going for it. Let's get started with Gadgetzan. Got a great flight point for both factions here, guards that try to at least stop people from griefing you while inside the town, it has a bank and even a neutral auction house. The questing in Tanaris, if you ask me, is top tier, especially all of the South Sea quests and Winterspring fields. There is a good chunk of quests over those areas that are concentrated into a small area which makes for a great questing experience. Tanaris also holds the dungeon Sulfarak, which is definitely a favourite by a ton of players because it really is such a cool and well laid out dungeon with some great bosses and boss loot inside for its level. Tanaris also has tons of cool places, where a lot of them were made into future content, such as the Gates of Uldum, that no one in the first few expansions had a clue what this was about. The underwater mini-town that I believe was only just recently added into retail not too long ago. And the Caverns of Time, which even though didn't come out until the Burning Crusade, was accessible like a lot of other places through some jumps, and if you were to make it inside while here in Vanilla or in Classic 2019 without ever playing the Burning Crusade, you really wouldn't have believed that such a cool place was hiding behind a big rock and a dragon. Moving on to what is my favourite zone of all time, we have the Hillsbrad Foothills at number 6. And yes, even though it's my favourite zone of all time, I just can't justify putting it in number 1 or really much higher because although the zone is so good for the Horde, I've got to be honest, it kind of sucks for the Alliance. Because as Alliance, you kind of come, don't have much to do, but a few things that you do have to do here are a bit annoying, like the Murloc head quest. But with that aside, we all know the good old Terramil vs South Shore battles. They've been spoken about for decades at this point, and for good reason, because my very first encounter with an Alliance player back in the day was in Hillsbrad, as for some reason my random touring ass ended up here at level 20, and I am so glad I did because this zone didn't disappoint me at all. From the Horde's perspective, Hillsbrad has a ton of quests all around the zone, but in particular the quests around the Hillsbrad Fields and Dungarok, which is a deadly high level 30-ish something elite questing area. The reason why it's my favourite zone though is because of the feeling and the aesthetic of this place. It just ticks all the boxes and all of the right boxes for me, with the balance of the beautiful and quiet nature paired alongside the danger of meeting the opposite faction for possibly the first time. I have never skipped or missed Hillsbrad while leveling in any version of the game on any character. And you know what? I never will, because it's zones like this that makes me really love this game at times. Right, time for the top 5. In 5th place we've got Westfall. I think pretty much all Alliance players are in agreement that Westfall is just such a good zone, especially to follow up from Elwynn Forest. Let's start with the zone itself. It's a relaxing but extremely active zone. It's absolutely jam-packed with quests because the zone itself isn't actually that big, which makes getting around it very easy because at this point you obviously don't have a mount yet. There's a lovely coastline all along the west and northern side of the zone, and no doubt the rest of the zone makes you feel nostalgic. The whole Defias Brotherhood theme just suits it all so well, and if you're a rogue and you get one of those masks to drop, it was time to go big boy flexing because you was the only class for a long time at such a low level that could wear something in the helm slot. Even though it had no stats, there isn't any stats in the game that can beat looking cool. Westfall also has the Dead Mines, which is one of the best dungeons in vanilla World of Warcraft. Throughout Westfall you do the Defias Brotherhood quest chain and it all ends inside the Dead Mines, with the last boss after defeating Edwin Van Cleef himself. But before you reach Westfall, you first level through Elwynn Forest, which is placed at number 4, making it not only my favourite starter zone, but also one of the best zones in the entire game. From the music, to the rolling fields, to Goldshire and everything in between. It's hard to criticise Elwynn Forest. The quests are amazing while levelling. The towns are well thought out and all close to each other. And just like seeing Orgrimmar for the first time, Alliance players will remember this. That just never gets old, does it? From when you start out in Northshire, you get the classic fantasy experience of coming from nothing, helping with small town problems, and then you progressively get to a point within the zone where you take on Hoggar, which of course, as everyone knows to this day, is still a raid boss. There is just so many memories people would have in Elwynn Forest. From pulling too many Murlocs, to the Goldshire Inn, to even swimming across the Duskwood and knowing you fucked up crossing that river. Whatever experience you have from starting out in Elwynn, drop it below. I'd love to hear how it all started for you and when you first started here. So let's move on. Taking the bronze medal at number 3 we have... That's right, it's Stranglethorn Vale, baby. I don't care what level you are, what gear you have, or what experience you have in the game, you will definitely still feel slightly on edge in Stranglethorn Vale. It's not nicknamed ST Vietnam for nothing. It is definitely the home and the embodiment of rogues and corpse camping, and it's happened to us all, but although you might not like that, it's what makes the zone itself memorable for a lot of people. This place is also huge and has an absolute Bible worth of quests to do, ranging from the low level of 30 all the way up till about mid 40s. The whole Nessingwary's expedition quest lines with the hunting that progressively levels up and ends with taking down big boy Bangalash himself. STV really does have peak questing, with a ton of different quest chains to do, various different elite quests, quests you can group up to complete, and also just chill solo. Stranglethorn also is home to the Gurubashi Arena, which is one of the few places in the entire game where once you're inside, anyone who isn't in your party is an enemy. And that goes for your own faction too. It's a free-for-all, and people will always go to the chest that spawns in the centre of the arena every event. We also have the 20-man raid Zul'Gurub, which is a great 20-man catch-up raid in the later parts of vanilla. There is Booty Bay, which is loved by so many people, and a ton even choose it for their Hearthstone here. Gromgold Base Camp for the Horde is just as good as Kargath to set your Hearthstone to, especially if you're no longer raiding the Blackrock Mountain. There is a major downside to STV though, which if you're Alliance, yet again you only get one flight point at Booty Bay and no northern flight point until later expansions, meaning if you wanted to quest in the north of Stranglethorn or even hit Zul'Gurub, you have to run all the way from Darkshire and Duskwood. So moving on to our second place and taking the silver medal, we have the Barrens. Now, some people hate the Barrens, but a whole lot of people just like myself love it. If there is a zone that is a mega zone, this is the place. It is absolutely absurd how big this place is for a single zone. It's so large that the Horde needs 3 separate flight points here, and that still doesn't feel enough at times. But luckily Blizzard way back then knew this and absolutely packed it with stuff to do. You can enter the Barrens at around level 12 and potentially not leave until your mid-level 20s. There is an immense amount of quests here, so much so that when you first arrive, if you were to pick up all of the quests available and were to use an add-on like Questy, your map would light up brighter than a Christmas tree. There is 3 separate full dungeons, all containing full sets of quests here too. We have Razorfen Downs, Razorfen Crawl, and the Wailing Caverns, of which the Wailing Caverns follows suit because that dungeon itself feels like a mega dungeon. It's so large, but it's also potentially my favourite dungeon of all time in Vanilla WoW. The entire coastline quests from Ratchet to Northwatch Hold are just like the South Sea quests in Tanaris, and quests like this when they are concentrated into a small zone are just so good. Except when you're waiting for the escort to respawn in Northwatch Hold. Yeah, skip that shit. The Barrens, at least for me, is like peak nostalgia when it comes to the zones in Vanilla World of Warcraft, because 3 out of 4 of the total races available to the Horde get funneled into this one mega zone. So not only is it packed with content, but it's also packed with people. This is of course why the Barrens chat was so infamous back in the day, because there's just so many different people talking within that chat. But this is also often where you met some great guys that you potentially ended up raiding with later on down the line. And now here we have it. Taking gold and the top spot on my list. That's right, Mulgore Crater. Honestly, I didn't have Mulgore Crater as the best zone when I created this list at first. But the more I kept shuffling zones around and thinking about which zones are good for all different reasons, Mulgore consistently stayed at the top, and I can't think of any other zone that has a better quest and experience. You gather all of your quests and you start at the very top of the zone, in a camp called Marshall's Refuge, which by the way has a shared flight point for both factions, which as we found out isn't the case for a lot of zones. And then you just sort of set off in a clockwise motion around the circular map, and it honestly feels like no matter what you kill, touch or loot, that it seems to just go towards completing one of the many quests that you've already picked up. Mulgore just has a bit of everything too. It's got tar pits, rivers and lakes, it's a jungle, a big molten ridge in the middle with lava spewing out. It's even got one of those ugly ass bug caves down at the bottom of the map. It's got raptors, dinosaurs, spiky kodo lizards, apes. This zone just has it all. And the main dev back in the day who designed this zone was definitely a Jurassic Park lover for sure. There is honestly very little you can criticise Mulgore Crater for, especially when it comes down to being a leveling zone. But there's always a but. There is one major downside, that is if you die in the southern part of the zone, you will have one hell of a corpse run. But all zones have downsides and upsides, and we all have our own preferences on what we like, which is why your idea of what the best zones are might be completely different. And if you've stuck to the end of this video, please let me know down below what your favourite zones are and why. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed.